Hi, welcome to Cafe Soko. My name's Dan Gold. It's okay. No one will know the bit that I just made a mistake. This is Cafe Soko, unless I've just mentioned that. My guest today is John Himpe, who's a broadcaster, travel blogger, writer extraordinaire, and most of all, person that's willing to be there at 9 o'clock in the evening in Hong Kong. Hi, John.
Hey, Dan.
How are you today?
Doing really good, actually. It's been a lot of travel in the last few days and a little bit more to come in the next 48 hours.
Now, I'm really excited for doing this podcast today because I don't know many people that have been to every single Disney park. I mean, you've done it.
Yeah, this is so. I've been on a bigger trip, but one of the things that I wanted to try and make happen on this trip was completing a bit of a goal. And it was back in 2010. My partner in crime, Chris, and I, we love to travel. And we had gone to Walt Disney World in 2010. And first trip for him. And we were sitting there one day and he had said, wouldn't it be kind of cool if we were to go and visit every park in the world? Because there are Disney theme parks in a number of places. And so the following year, we had gone to Anaheim, to the original Disneyland, which is a great experience. Then the year following that, we had gone to London and Paris. And when we realized we were going to Paris, we said we should go to Disneyland Paris. So we did that. And then Chris moved to Tokyo in 2013. And in short order, shortly after moving there, he bought an annual pass to the Tokyo Disney Resort. And actually, he's doing a rather extensive blog. tdrexplorer.com is his website. And they do a podcast and all that kind of stuff, all about the parks in English in Japan, because there's a considerable English audience and not a lot of content. So he's been working on that for the last 2 years. And then when I was in this part of the world, traveling through Southeast Asia, it just made a lot of sense to meet up in Hong Kong and go to Hong Kong Disneyland, which is, as of right now, at this moment, the final park to visit on our list of parks to visit in the world of Disney. However, June 16th, 2016, that all gets screwed up when they open Shanghai Disney Resort, which means they have to make a trip to Shanghai sometime in the near future.
So it's awesome that you've kind of managed to integrate this trip, this journey that you've been on to hit up all the Disney resorts and get that into the travel blogging that you've been doing, because that's made for some great content. Now, for anyone that doesn't know, today's topic is 5 things that you need to know about being a travel blogger. Now, I've got a list of 10 here, and I think that we can narrow this down to 5 distinct takeaways.
Yeah.
For you, what has been the most challenging thing when you've been traveling in regards to sourcing content, producing content, distributing content, or has it started from the very beginning, the planning stage? What was the largest challenge? Finding the story?
You know, finding the stories isn't that tough, because if you're doing travel correctly, you're going out and you're experiencing a new place every day. There are things that strike you as interesting. There are things that strike you as, gee, people might want to know about this. And so finding stories is actually pretty easy. It is the discipline in consistency that I think is the killer for everybody who gets involved in blogging. And it's not just travel blogging. I mean, if you are running, a communications department for a company, let's say you are doing content marketing for your company, and you have no plan for consistency whatsoever, you are screwed right out of the gate. And I think that is the biggest challenge, especially on the road, because you're dealing with bus schedules, train schedules, flight schedules. Do I have a place to sleep tonight? Oh, I've got this going on. There's a whole bunch of things that are kind of getting in the way of creating content. And so for me, I find I have to say, okay, yeah, I know there's a whole big world out there. There's museums to go visit. There's things to go do. But today I need to lock myself down in the hostel or at a coffee shop or wherever and punch out 2 or 3 pieces. I need to script this week's podcast. I need to get all this crap done, because if I'm not consistent, I don't have an audience.
When it came to getting the audience, how did you create the awareness in the first place?
I had a little bit of help, I think, off the hop that probably a lot of people in my position don't necessarily have. I was on the radio for 2.5 years consistently, like on Monday through Friday, and I was doing Fridays for a number of years in Saskatoon. And over that time, I amassed a fairly considerable following on Twitter, and considerable, at least in my mind. And it was one of those things where I had a built-in audience of people that when my time in radio came to an end a little prematurely, I kind of sat there and went, okay, I'm going to try and leverage this audience that I have and bring them along for the ride. And not everybody comes because it's not everybody's cup of tea, and that's fine. But for the people who did come along, I've had some people who've been incredibly loyal, and they will eat up every piece of content that I put out there. And some people are just curious, and they go, oh, that's what you're doing now. And regardless, that helps build an audience. And then I think it's important to find the community around whatever you're talking about. For travel, as an example, there's a number of hashtags on Twitter that if you got to figure out your community. And so TTOT, Travel Talk of Twitter, is one of the big hashtags that when I'm pushing content out, I make sure that's in a tweet, because it's going to at least either get me views or it's going to get me retweets. And if I can push that content further and further afield, I win.
So as a takeaway from this from the beginning, I think we definitely need to say that doing your research is relatively straightforward as a tourist or as a traveler, but being disciplined with your time and making sure you schedule time to be able to curate and create content is an important thing. So first takeaway is planning time. I think that's a great
Absolutely.
one. So you were lucky you had your existing audience that you were able to bring elements of them, and you had the new audience that you were able to bring along as a new crowd, a new tribe. How have you found being useful? Because the one thing that I really want as a consumer of content is for any content to have value to me, it needs to be useful. So let's say that I'm going to be traveling to a place that you went. So let's say Tokyo. Let's say, I want to know about that. I'm going to find your travel materials interesting, but it needs to have a takeaway for me, something where I go, you know what, I've got to go there because John said so.
I think with that kind of stuff, it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, being useful is something that'll get you way more traction in the long run than any other kind of content. And the flip side of that is that in the short term, it doesn't give you that warm, fuzzy feeling that you get from other content as a content creator. So you're playing the long game with useful content all the time. It's evergreen stuff will not get you the traction on day 0, day 1. It's day 31, day 41, day 51, where if you've written that content correctly, you've SEO'd the heck out of it. Sorry. And you kind of get yourself, you create content that's going to be easy to find and easy to understand and easy to read. That's where the payoff comes, because there are pieces that I have. A good example, and you mentioned Tokyo. I did a long read piece on SIM cards in Japan, because it's a bit of a strange market when you go to. If you bring a cell phone along, there are some things you got to know, some rules and all that kind of stuff. And that piece routinely continues to get hits to this day, even though it's about a 3-month-old piece. Whereas, and so on day 1, it didn't get a ton of hits, but over the course of time, it's cumulatively built up this great audience of people who've read it. Conversely, the personal experiences, the stuff where I talk about stuff that has happened to me, gets this great kind of surge and rush of people in the early days of it getting posted. But then it dies in the long run. And that's one thing I've noticed. I had a piece about how I had a bit of an unfortunate circumstance in Borneo, where I was going onto a boat and I had a digital audio recorder with me because I wanted to get some sound for my podcast. Natural sound, if you're doing podcasts and you're trying to take people to where you are, natural sound's great. You should do it all the time, except for when you drop your recorder in the South China Sea and you lose it forever. And so I wrote this piece and it was a great experience in the long run, because had I not dropped that recorder in the sea, I wouldn't have realized that my travel insurance had run out. And so it was like this horrible thing that happened that prevented an even more horrible thing from happening. So I shared this personal story, and in the short term, it got this great surge of views, because it was something that had happened to me, and it was a bit of an emotional piece, but it has not seen the light of day for the most part ever since then. So you have to understand, being useful is playing the long game. And a lot of great bloggers, especially in this sector, have made the conscious decision to be useful rather than being personal. And I think that's a very clear choice you have to make. And I've been trying to do a little bit of both, because I'm still trying to spread my wings on trying to be a good storyteller. I think as much as this is about being, kind of winning, I think it's also about skills development as you go along. That's a big part of the reason why I decided to do this kind of content, is because I didn't want to get rusty. I didn't want to possibly try and find a job in radio after, 6 or 8 months of traveling and having not been behind a microphone for 6 or 8 months. That's a terrible way to try and go about living. So, I think if you're in it to win it, you got to figure out the right piece of content or the right style of content that you're going to go after, and put your resources into that.
And I think you're absolutely right on that, because there's two examples of this. I think that if we look at people like the Vagga brothers, they're very good at taking people on tours, showing people behind the scenes, and maybe having a bit of practical advice with it. But then I was following a family from Australia who had given up their house and their regular lifestyle. There was the, general, normal 4-member family, son, daughter, mum, dad. And they decided to get on their yacht and travel around the outside of Australia and then travel elsewhere. And theirs was all about how the family dynamic was interacting, opening up their lives to really have a warts and all view, still controlled, but a very open view of it. And they were talking about the destinations from the boat point of view. We've come into this place, isn't it beautiful? But actually, if you broke that down, and apart from when things went wrong on the boat and there were things dealing with repairs or family issues, because being wrapped up in a tub for however many months or years, there's going to be a level of conflict or friction.
Yeah,
the actual material of we've pulled up in this place, we've pulled up in this place is quite a cyclic thing, if we say that kindly.
Yeah, exactly.
When you come to going places, do you feel that there's pressure to do interesting stuff?
I have to find something interesting in order for me to create a piece of content about it. And sometimes that leads me down the path of maybe creating stuff that maybe I'm more interested in than a potential audience might be. But then again, every once in a while it hits. A good example of that actually is over on YouTube. So I when I started out doing this, there were 3 disciplines that I wanted to focus on, because I was a little bit scatterbrained, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So there was the blog, so text, there was the podcast weekly, and then there was videos, YouTube videos. And when I was in Tokyo, I was shooting a lot of video, which was partially because I had a home base to work out of. I wasn't moving around. I was in one city for 3 months. And so it's a little bit easier to kind of lug around a camera and a tripod if you want to, and do that kind of stuff. And one of the videos that I had shot was in toward the end of November. While Japan doesn't actually celebrate Christmas, they love Christmas. And in Tokyo, one of the things that companies spend tons of money on are these elaborate Christmas light displays. And they last until Valentine's Day. It's a big, big thing. Couples will go out and watch the lights, and that's really all you do. You go, you might have like a glass of hot wine and you watch the lights, and it's a thing. So I took my tripod out one night and I went to shoot a number of light displays. That video that I shot has actually, I think it is, if it's not the top, it's the top 2-3 videos that I've produced on YouTube. And again, it's not crazy number of hits, but it's it's funny because I thought that was kind of interesting because it's a unique Japanese thing. It turns out people just want to watch Christmas lights on YouTube, it seems. And so it's kind of like, you kind of sit there and go, it was interesting to me in the moment. Whereas other things, I did a video about the Railway Museum in Tokyo, which again was of interest to me. And there's a lot of railway fans out there. It's done okay. It's not done Christmas lights numbers, but it's done okay. So I think ultimately, as a content creator, you have to be interested in the subject matter. It would be like, and to bring it back into a broader worldview out of travel, but because there's a life lesson there, is if you're working for an outdoors company, like let's say you're working for a company that sells skis, snowboards, and mountain gear, it would be a really horrible thing if the person who's in charge of writing that content has no interest whatsoever in being in the mountains, and they're actually terrified of going down a black run, because that would just be a bad thing. So I think you have to have an interest. You can't fake interest, especially if it's your voice or your face on things. It makes it immensely tough.
When it comes to that content, how do you decide what format it goes on to? Obviously, it's really easy if you've got your phone there to take a quick picture and Instagram or put it onto whatever format that you want. How do you make the executive decision? Do you go, okay, this is a core piece of content and I'm going to repurpose it into a blog post, a long form piece, a couple of pictures that I've taken, and just get them out there? Or is there a thought process and a strategy behind, okay, this place is going to make a really good video, and then I could do a couple of tease images to throw towards the video to cross promote it? What's the thought process behind that?
When I'm looking at content to create, I generally start out with what is the story, I think is the biggest question. And then with the resources I have access to, that's when I kind of decide what the best tool to tell the story is. And so when it comes to Christmas lights, still pictures of them would be kind of okay, but there's motion, there's movement. And I think that's the thing. Nobody likes, I'm probably not going to have fans when I say this. Nobody likes watching boring local TV news. Sometimes, you go, and this is the classic thing. And I've worked in small markets and media markets, but this weekend was the annual, hillbilly hoedown and it was all the farm machinery was out, and you had all this, everybody's walking around looking at the latest innovations, blah, blah, blah. Great event, great for the economy, but guess what? Crap pictures, right? And so nobody wants to see a bunch of, big farm machines sitting there doing nothing. Now, if they're out in the field and there's like stuff getting kicked up in the wind, that's great video. Okay, it's okay video. But I mean, if something has motion and there's an opportunity for great video, that's where I gravitate towards. If I sit back and go, okay, this is rich with sound, that it should go into the podcast. And actually, I had a couple instances, and sometimes you can't plan for that. Like, for example, in Kuala Lumpur, before I lost my portable audio recorder, I was at the mall one day, because I like to try and not everything is about, doing the whole Uber touristy thing. Sometimes you just want to go be like a local. I went and hung out at the mall one afternoon, and I always kept my recorder in my bag. And I was walking along, and in the corridor by the LRT station at the shopping mall in Kuala Lumpur, they had a busker set up where a number of buskers from around KL would come, and they would perform every day from like 3 p.m. till 10 o'clock at night. And they would just keep on playing and playing and playing for people who were going through the public transport system. And I stood there for 25 minutes and recorded this one guy doing cover versions of everything from Eric Clapton to changing Leonard Skinner's Sweet Home Alabama to Sweet Home Kuala Lumpur. And had all this audio, and I thought, what the hell am I going to do with this? And it ended up being bumper music for an episode of my podcast, because it kind of set the scene. KL is a bit of a quirky city, and here's just how quirky it is. And so I think, figuring out that that's the right platform for something is good. If I can tell this, if I hear the story in my head a lot of times, like, how you have an inner monologue, and I hear myself kind of, as I'm experiencing something, thinking through what my inner monologue is, that's likely going to be a written piece. So a lot of times it may be in the moment, and that may not necessarily be the best way to do it all the time. But I find that I've definitely, I think I've put the right things into the right boxes along the way. I'd like to become, and this is just a growth thing, I'd probably have to become more adept at choosing that in advance sometimes. I think I've lucked into it in some ways.
When it comes to the traveling, I think we can take away from what you've just said is there's always an element of be spontaneous. Don't rigidly plan things, because sometimes things just happen. If you're prepared, you've got a recorder there, or you've just make mental notes even to capture that moment of how you felt or how it sounds. You know, at the moment we still can't transmit smells, which maybe via the internet is a good thing with some of the things that people put on Periscope. But I think that, you know, your story about the guy in Kuala Lumpur is certainly a very interesting one. Do you? Oh no, sorry, carry on.
No, I was just going to say a flip side of that, though. After I had lost the audio recorder, my ability to capture sound remotely had greatly diminished. But last week, and I talked about this actually in my podcast that just went out tonight. But when I was in Hanoi last week, I was walking around. There's a big lake in the middle of Hanoi, kind of in the middle of the city, walking around. And the one thing you kind of have to remember about Vietnam is it's still a communist country, right? And I get around this lake, and all of a sudden I notice there's this huge group of people gathered around, and it's a group of about 8 or 10 young people. I would say they're between the ages of like 18 and 22, somewhere in there. They've got guitars, they've got a drum box, they're singing, and they're making beautiful music. And in my mind, I'm going, I got to capture this somehow. And all I've got is a bloody iPhone in my hand. So I open up voice memo. I'm like, it's either going to be good or it's going to be crap, but at least I'll have it captured. And I'm glad I did that, because after I recorded 2 of their songs, a guy in a blue uniform walks up to the kids and basically tells them this is an unauthorized performance and shoos them all away. And, you know, you see the heavy hand of communism come down and slap these kids basically because the music is not approved. It's not part of the approved playlist. So get out of here. And it became a story that I was able to do about, you know, just what censorship is like in a communist country, right? Because that audio helps tell that story now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. My friend has just been to North Korea, and he has created such interesting content from behind the wall. And the most interesting angle for me on that story is that he was chaperoned everywhere, which is obvious because they qualify it by that person being your authorized translator. But you can see where within his content, and he does say more or less, is that there's times at which it's maybe more comfortable for them with how they're dealing with tourists and less comfortable how they deal with people. So let's get back to a couple of practical points. When you're on the road, how do you put your material together, and how do you get it distributed? I mean, surely not everywhere in the world has as fantastic a Wi-Fi network as Canada.
You'd be surprised. So I'm a Mac guy, so I live on my MacBook Pro. It's actually it's an old workhorse, by the way. It's 6 years old this year, 6 years old this year. So it's put in more than its lifespan. It's probably going to get retired once I find sufficient employment once I get back to Canada. But it's done great work. I'm an old spirit, I think, when it comes to computers, and so I hate word processors with a passion. So all my writing that I do actually is in a plain text editor before, you know, and that goes for the podcast. That goes for even planning out shots for a video. If I want to plan shots out in advance, if I'm writing a blog post, all that stuff I do in a plain text editor, and then it goes into the appropriate kind of format that I need it to. So if it's going on the blog as text, I use WordPress. If it's for the podcast, obviously it just kind of stays in there, and I voice it out of there. And then for audio, I'm using a combination of tools. Audio Hijack is a great piece of software. Rogue Amoeba is the company that makes it. They also make an audio editor called Fission. And those two products together work really well. If I want to do a Skype interview with somebody, for example, Audio Hijack is it's the bee's knees. And then to actually edit stuff together, multi-track, Audacity is my editor of choice because it's free. For video, I've been using Final Cut Pro. And then the choke point is, like you said, the internet. And I've been surprised because the quality of internet has been fairly good along the way. Malaysia actually has surprisingly good internet. KL is not bad at all. And actually, even in places like Borneo, you have very good connection speeds. What mostly hampers them, to be really honest with you, is the phenomenon of Netflix and chill. Hostels become a place where everybody has a tablet or 2 or 3 and a laptop, and all 3 of those devices are streaming something. And so at about 9 o'clock at night, when you're trying to upload a video to YouTube or a podcast to the website, that's where you hit your choke. And so it's a matter of, figuring out the right way to do some of that stuff. I also try and, I keep my iPhone with a local SIM card in it at all times. So and data is so cheap here over wireless that frankly, I'm okay tethering to my phone if I have to upload something. I've done that a couple of times, and make no apologies about it. That's why I'm paying for it. So, but yeah, I was really surprised. Like in Malaysia, for example, I was spending 50 ringgit, 42 ringgit, something like that. So not even just over 20, not even 20 Canadian dollars I think that was for 3 gigabytes of data. So it was really dirt cheap. It was great. But yeah, it's Wi-Fi is really the choke point, and surprisingly, it's been okay along the way.
That's really lucky because through my last role, we were doing a feed with a major international airline, and the editor had got to destination. They'd done all the editing on the plane. They landed, they got straight over after the press conference to an upload point at a hotel, and we had 30K to 50K upload speed. And this was a major holiday resort. I'm not going to say that it was in Vancouver, but it was in Vancouver. And in the end, the only way to get the material to us as a kind of just to get something quickly, did a private link on YouTube, sent it to us, ripped it from YouTube, got it out for the media, and then fed via satellite later because it was the only way to get the material to us. So that was an interesting day, and that's why the internet connection's kind of an interesting one. Well, that was one of the things. Dropbox was so slow that Dropbox kept dropping out. It was just too painful. And the packets just kept dropping, which kind of hints towards a problem, actually, if packets are dropping. When it comes to SEO and your material that you make, it's easy to over-produce content and over-tag things just to go, oh, I've got to do this, oh, I've got to do that, and write things into content just to make sure that you include people. Like, for example, if I now talk about how much I loathe the music of Justin Bieber, I might actually write in the notes about this, Justin Bieber and my love of his music, yes or no. And then I might tag the article Justin Bieber. I've just mentioned Justin Bieber a few times, but verbally and on video, it makes no difference until it's written down. So the temptation of Justin Biebering or not the SEO.
I'm a firm believer in creating SEO that is going to be what I would search if I was looking for the content. So, and that's how I always approach things, is that if I was looking for this piece of content, what am I going to punch into a search engine? And where it kind of gives me a headache sometimes is because I like to be creative. I like creative headlines every once in a while, and creative headlines don't SEO worth a damn. But every once in a while, sometimes for the sake of the art, I will forego getting a lot of clicks and write the headline that I feel should be there. So I'm not the best practitioner of SEO in terms of like every piece has to be SEO'd properly. But on the pieces that are useful, the long reads, the stuff, the evergreen stuff, I'm a big believer that the headline should be about, what I would search to try and find it. And those first 2 paragraphs, really should sum up what am I about to read here, and and try and use words in those paragraphs that are going to possibly be searchable. I don't overthink tags and categories too much. I think people way overdo that kind of stuff, because while search engines understand them, most normal people don't. And I just kind of, and I'm a little bit haphazard that way, but I do believe that if you keep it simple and keep it short, you're probably better off in the long run.
Yes. Thank you, Justin Bieber. Is that enough? Yeah. Okay. So as we get to the end of the regular Cafe Soco podcast, I'd like to thank you for taking part in this. We will do a Blab extra. Now, if you're watching on Blab now, then you could just carry on watching, or you can watch this again at a time of your choosing. The link will be in the page with the podcast. So the 5 things that I've got from you to this point, and actually I think we'll carry on with this list a little bit further after the end of the podcast. So 1, planning time for production, making sure that you've set the time aside. 2, choosing whether you're going to be interesting and a storyteller as against a practical list informing person where it's practical tips, making the decision whether it's story first or it's a list of practicals. 3, you have to be interested in the topics. You have to be authentic, because if you don't care about what you're doing and if you're not living the story, it's just a presentation that feels artificial. That's what I'm getting. 4, be prepared to record at any point and be spontaneous. Even if you lose that material down into a river somewhere, that material is still gold, and make sure you've got it backed up. And 5, look from the view of the audience. When you're writing blog material or producing a video or producing a podcast, what is it that your audience actually needs? Where's that convergence point between you telling your story and what they're interested in hearing? I think those are the 5 things that I take away from what we've talked about so far. And I think we'll do a couple of Blab Live extras to just round out this as an exercise. John, for this moment, as this is in the podcast, John, thank you so much for joining me. If people want to find out more, where could they go?
The website is gonejohn.com. Twitter, it's @gonejohnlive. Facebook, Instagram, same coordinates. And for me personally, because I tried to separate the project out from everything else that I do, at John Himpe, JOHNHIMPE, and johnhimpe.com is where you'll find all my other stuff.
John, thank you.
Thank you.
And now the Blab Extra.
Yay!
Yay! So what people will notice is if they listen to the podcast and if they watch back the Blab, they'll notice that they're 2 slightly different edits, but that's because I realized that I overran, but I did it slightly on purpose so that we had some nicely rounded material. I think that's really important. When you're looking at everything you do during your journeys and carrying all this equipment and thinking of doing travel blogging as a project, at what point do you draw the line between being a tourist with equipment and being a professional on a job? I mean, the mindset of how you pack your equipment might change rather than, oh, you know, it's just a casual piece of equipment, goes to this is an essential piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And then you mention about dropping your recorder and then going, you know, this is actually quite good because I've, you know, my insurance has lapsed. And, you know, we've all done something or other in the last, you know, however many years of our lives we've gone and had one of those moments. So where's the mindset between the professional communicator and being someone traveling and insurances and the importance of equipment, backup equipment, knowing where to source equipment?
Yeah. Part of what I did for this trip, because I was working with a very specific budget, and I had some gear already in my possession, camera, for example. Actually, all the big ticket stuff I had. The only thing I didn't have in my possession at the time was a GoPro, which turns out to be probably the worst investment I've made because it's barely been used on this whole trip. I learned along the way that I'm not really the adventure traveler. I'm not the guy who's jumping off cliffs and holding a GoPro going, "Ah, look at me." Not my kind of thing.
Did you have a selfie stick though?
I do have a selfie stick, and I had one a long time ago.
You should
and
be thoroughly ashamed.
No, because, and here's the thing about selfie sticks is that with a GoPro, it actually is not a bad thing if you like to kind of get a higher angle shot. It's just I like a variety of shots, and having worked in TV for a number of years, and kind of gravitating back toward the question of what mindset. When I'm out producing a piece, especially if it's video, I'm all about elbows out and get out of my way because I need to get my shots. So if I'm shooting a sequence, I don't care that Sally wants to get an iPhone photo. She's going to get elbowed out of the way because I need to get my shots. And so, I mean, that's a big part of it is if you're going to create this kind of content, you have to be committed to actually shooting things properly. Otherwise, you're not going to have the material to work with in post. That said, though, you have to be flexible. And Japan taught me about flexibility tons because, and this is the thing I learned because I went to Japan with this mentality that I'm going to create all these great pieces. One of the pieces, I actually shot most of this piece. It was the folks who make the Toto toilets, the Toto Japanese super toilets. They have a showroom in Shinjuku that you can go to, and you can see all the latest innovations in Japanese toilets and bathroom fixtures, which is cool because Japanese toilets are one of the most amazing things in the world. They have like this electronic keypad that it'll spray and clean you off. It'll air dry you. There's a deodorizer that'll run, and all these kind of things. Like it's high tech bathroom gear, right? And Japan has a bit of a reputation for this. I thought it would be cool to go and do a video of the showroom and some of these different things. And so I get to the showroom and I've shot all this stuff, and I'm about to shoot my last shot, and these two lovely ladies come over to me, and they're very typical Japanese women who are just, they don't want to disrupt you. They don't want to be, put you out of your way, but they come over with this piece of paper and they say, please read. And I look at the piece of paper and it says, no video photography and only for personal use. Well, I was going to upload to YouTube. And so logistically, I can't complete the shoot. And that was the first instance. That was like day 3 of being in Japan. And for the rest of the 90 days that I spent in Japan, I kept hitting brick walls, which were not allowed to shoot in public, not allowed to shoot video here, not allowed to do this, not allowed to do that. They are very big on privacy and shooting stuff in public. However, there were still things I needed to get. And so taking the professional mentality of I need to get my shots, I would break out the iPhone every once in a while and play dumb tourist. And so, for example, at one of the department stores, there's a Kit Kat Chocolatory, it's called. It's a Kit Kat boutique. They sell high-end Kit Kat. They had like gold leaf Kit Kat for Christmas time. And it's one of the few places in the world that sell it. And I went there and I thought, well, I can't break out the big camera. And I knew this going into it. So I had the iPhone and I'm gently kind of, I'm taking really good shots, but I'm kind of looking like a dumb tourist in the moment. And so that's where you have to kind of have this mix of, you have to kind of be able to play the part of a tourist. But if you don't have the professional mindset, you might as well not be bothering to create content.
So just on that, do you notice when you're shooting as tourist mode with an iPhone or a small practical little camera, do you notice that you shoot in a certain way that looks a bit more reportage than when you're shooting with a DSLR or a broadcast camera or an ENG? Do you notice your shots are different because obviously you can get that much closer? Does it feel a bit more personal when you look at the shot?
I to be honest, everything I've shot on the road has been ENG style, and mostly because, my biggest limitation actually is with my DSLR, is to do zooms and that kind of stuff. I don't have a graceful way to zoom in and out of things, and so everything has to be straight cuts if I want to, wide shot, close up, that kind of stuff. So there's not a whole lot of movement with the camera, and I've only got an iPhone 5, so there's no image stabilization, that kind of stuff. So I'm very gentle when I'm shooting with my iPhone, and you're right. As a result, you get a little bit more up close and personal with some of the things that you're shooting, but it's still in that ENG format where I'll go to the back of the room to get a wide shot. I'll get up close and I'll get a close up and kind of move around that way. And so it's it's kind of applying the mindset to it. But I've always been a big fan of. I was a big fan in the 90s of City TV. In Toronto. And one of the things that they pioneered use of actually was taking consumer grade gear and shooting broadcast television with it. I mean, the whole idea of the videographer for City and Much Music and those entities back in the 90s required that kind of gear. And so that was one of the things I tried to focus on through a lot of my career was, when I was working in TV is, okay, how can I use this other stuff and shoot good quality things? And I've built up a bit of a skill set with that over time.
So when it comes to insurance, particularly, you mentioned that at one point it lapsed.
Yeah.
How do you stand as a travel blogger when you've got this equipment with you? Do you have to declare that you're a professional working, or do you basically go, I'm a traveler and I'm doing a blog? Two separate things.
Yeah, and it's the latter for me. I'm a traveler. I've got a blog. I shoot a lot of stuff. I shoot things professionally, in a professional style. But when I look at my Google AdSense at the end of the day, it's not even going to pay for dinner in Hong Kong tonight. So, it's kind of like, there's a reality to it, is that I consider the fact that because it's more of a passion project and the monetization hasn't been a focus. And if it was a bigger thing, I think there would probably be a bigger conversation about it. But even my sense is with a lot of travel bloggers that are out there and travel vloggers, they're going around from country to country on tourist visas. And, if you don't have a huge supporting crew, you don't really kind of really see red flags. And so I'm willing to kind of keep skating by on that for now.
I wonder, when it comes to people like the Vagga brothers particularly, they must be known so well around the world that they must be on professional tickets, but we can only guess.
Yeah. Well, so backing up though, there's one, from a purely professional perspective, there's a great TV show. It's on Netflix still for a while, called Departures, which if you haven't watched it yet, it's worth watching on Netflix. It's two Canadian guys and a cameraman. And they traveled the world over the course of 3 seasons of the show. The whole premise was going to places that aren't necessarily the traditional backpacker places. And actually, in one episode, they went to Libya, they went to North Korea. They've been all over the place. And going into Libya, they had issues, I know, because of the type of camera they were shooting with. They were told, oh no, you're journalists, and so we need to have a proper media entourage with you. This is back before Libya became a mess. So they ended up they were treated like proper media journalists in Libya, whereas a lot of other countries, they kind of just, go right through customs and it's a big ass camera. What's your problem?
Just want to say hello to Jane and hello to Colin. Thank you for joining us. When it comes to the things that you've learnt on your journey, for a start, can you just tell us a rough list of where you've traveled over the last few months and what are the things that you've learnt from a practical point of view?
Sadly, my list of destinations is not as extensive as I had hoped it would be. And it's mostly because of budget. Budget did not last as long as the trip intention was. And so I spent 3 months in Tokyo. And that was really, I love Tokyo. I had a place to stay. It was the right place to go at the right time. And I thought that would be a good kind of place to maybe figure out how to do some of this stuff in a place I was kind of familiar, but I could still be tourist. So that was starting point. And then after New Year's, traveled to Malaysia and actually spent just over a month in Malaysia. So starting in Kuala Lumpur, worked my way south through Malacca, Johor Bahru, went to Borneo, went up to Langkawi, Penang, and then all the way back to KL. And at that point, I was trying to decide where I wanted to go next. And I had so many people who kept on saying, "Oh, Bali's fantastic. Bali's fantastic." I thought, okay, cool. I want to go to Bali. And then I looked, and it was during Lunar New Year, and the prices were about 4 times and just not what I wanted. So Vietnam was fairly affordable, and I was actually able to, from a flight perspective, I was able to wrangle my visa within 24 hours. And so got my visa, bought my plane ticket, and spent the last 25 days in Vietnam. And after that, came up here to Hong Kong. So the number of destinations haven't been that grand, but as I've said on the blog and on the podcast, I'm coming back to Canada to hit the pause button. It's not the stop button. And so my intention is to work for a while longer and then, continue traveling. So this is not over, as they say.
I like the way that you put that. You've just put it that I'm pausing what I love to do. I'm going to go and do some work now, and I'm going to get back to this a little bit later on. So just for people that have just joined us, just give them the digits of where people can find you.
Sure. So web, it is gonejohn.com. On Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, it is Gone John Live. There are too many Gone Johns out there, it appears. And then for personally, if you go right up there, at John Himpe is my Twitter handle, and samespelling.com is my personal website.
So the whole purpose of this is to give people advice, or maybe not advice, but share your personal experience on having traveled around. We've got this list of five things that you can do to make sure that you win at social media whilst you're traveling the globe or any particular country. We've said planning time and setting time aside for your production, choosing whether you're a really interesting, fun storyteller or a practical list person that just gives tips and hints, because there is a mid ground, but it tends to be that people fall into one or the other. You've got to be genuinely interested in the topics that you are recording, because if you're not, it's not authentic. It's just going to come across that you're going through the motions. Be prepared to record at any time or make notes so that you've got that material, because if you haven't got it, you can't share it. And always look at things from the view of your audience as a part of your general storytelling, because if you're telling the story and you're not taking into account what they need or what they want from you, then it's going to go nowhere. Now, that's an interesting thing. Did you look at analytics? You said about AdSense just now. Did you look at analytics at all to see whether some blogs worked better than others? Did you play with A/B testing with titles at all?
Not A/B testing, but I would watch to see what would get traction after it went up, and also track it for time afterwards. And that, I stopped doing certain things after. I for example, one of the things that I had done early on, I thought, kind of in this mode of, let's see, throw a whole bunch of stuff at the wall and see what works. And so before I had left on the trip, one of the posts that I had done was about travel music and the music that maybe you listen to when you travel, and, create a Spotify playlist, because I thought, well, maybe that's a good way to engage people. And it sunk faster than my audio recorder did in the South China Sea. It was dead and gone. And about a week later, I pulled it off the site, and it was just gone, because it got no traction whatsoever. Nobody cared. And so, there are things like that I've stopped doing. Whereas on the other hand, a post that I had done for January, and I have to do the February version actually here this weekend or this week. I'm not sure. Yeah, whatever we're still in. Every day is a Saturday to me right now. But it was a piece about where I stayed over the course of January. So every hostel I stayed at, every hotel I stayed at, I did a little bit of a piece, and if I had photos, I included those photos, and that got really good traction, because, and it has some long-term advantage too, because if people are searching for hostels in such and such place, there might be a chance that's going to come up in their search. And so, I'm pretty pragmatic about stuff. I don't get too attached to a content idea. It's if it feels like you're pushing a ball of whatever uphill and it's rolling back on you, step out of the way and let it roll back down the hill and pick up a new ball, because that's clearly not the one that's going to work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You were mentioning about being in Japan and having the piece of paper handed to you that please don't film here for personal use only, etc. like that. In London, virtually everywhere there's don't film, don't do this, don't do that, and then you've got the police not always, in UK law, not always understanding the rights and wrongs of public filming or filming in a public place. Have you encountered, beyond the toilet episode, which if you haven't seen what happened, just go back. It's not as salacious as it sounds, but I think it's an interesting story. But if it gets people to rewatch, let's do it. Yes, Justin Bieber and Japanese toilets.
Yes.
So have there been any moments where you've had that? Oh, I really can't.
Yeah, I mean, I'll back up one more step on Japan just to kind of lay the groundwork of how serious it is in Japan. Television news in Japan, if they are filming B-roll of somebody, say like somebody's walking out of a courthouse, and that person is in the center of the frame, everything else around that person, objects, people, buildings, are blurred out. And so that is the After Effects guys in Japan television have jobs for life, because literally that is a requirement of television news in Japan. So that's the extent to which they believe in privacy, which I think is a little over the top, but that's just my editorialization on that. I would say I encountered it in places that were expected. I mean, I went to Tokyo Game Show, which is in the United States, they have Consumer Electronics Show and the big video game expos and that kind of stuff. Video Game Show is, or Tokyo Game Show is the video game expo in Tokyo. I think they say something like 30,000 people go to it in a day. It's crazy. And there was a brand new Star Wars video game, I guess, that came out, and I was trying to shoot some B-roll because they had a setup where there were people kind of in this kind of Last Supper formation playing against each other. And it looked really cool. And I held up my camera, not even for 5 seconds. And I had a guy come over and tap me on the shoulders and do this. And this is the sign in Japan for no or no good. And he said, no filming. And I said, okay. Walked a little further along, found another booth that had something interesting going on, turn on the camera. Somebody comes up, no filming. And so, and I had my DSLR with me trust me, my DSLR looked nothing like most other people's DSLR. They got more pro looking cameras than mine. I looked like I was I had, the elementary school special basically. And, yeah, they are big on not filming in public spaces, in general. So, there are things that you have to do to kind of work around that. A lot of times I was sensitive to it in Japan, to the extent to which if I was shooting B-roll of something, and a good example is I did a piece actually on Shinjuku Station. That was actually the first piece I shot in Tokyo. And I wanted to get a shot of people coming through the turnstiles. So I did a close-up, an extreme close-up of the place where you tap the Suica card. It's kind of like the Oyster card in London, or the Octopus card here in Hong Kong. And I just got a nice kind of tight close-up. So all you caught was like the back pocket of somebody walking through and them tapping the card. And the card was what was in focus. And that was a great piece of B-roll. That actually sustained for a while. And then when I wanted to get a wide shot of people walking through, just kind of racked it out of focus a little bit. And if anybody asks the question, why is that out of focus? Well, it's privacy reasons, and it is what it is. And so there's workarounds. There's always workarounds. But in Japan, people really do not like being on camera. It's amazing actually to see. One last story to share on that front. There's a group called Mushi Mushi Japan, which is a funny name. And they're an organization that promotes Japanese music artists abroad. And they do concerts every year in London, Paris, LA, New York, you name it. All over the world, they do these concerts, and they fly in Japanese artists. And Tokyo, they actually had a 3-day weekend festival. Now, for locals in Japan, They paid roughly the equivalent of about 150 Canadian dollars to buy a 3-day festival pass. If you had a foreign passport, my passport's across the room, if you had a foreign passport, you got in for free. And there's a reason why. Sky Perfect TV, which is the big satellite operator, was filming the concert for broadcast. And the pit area right in front of the stage was reserved for foreign visitors because us foreigners have no qualms about ending up on camera. Let's face it, we will do stupid crap on camera. No, you tell us to do anything, we will do it for you, right? That's a thing. Whereas the Japanese visitors or the Japanese guests at the event don't want to be on camera. And so they're actually sitting up in the rafters. And they've paid $100 for like the worst tickets in the house. And all the foreigners are down front going, woo, sing. And so, and again, that kind of drives home maybe the privacy point. People are willing to pay and have crappy seats just to not be on camera.
Just on the, as we get to the last couple of minutes of this, I want to obviously express my thanks, John, for you taking part in this. When it comes to social media and listening to what people have fed back to you, whether it's, you know, oh, I really like this, or, oh, why didn't you go to X, or, oh, you've told that story wrong. I don't know if you've had any feedback in that sense. Have you used that as a part of the building of how you approach producing content for travel blogging?
A little bit. I mean, I've had kind of, my interactions have been good. They haven't been necessarily in that area where we've been creating long conversations with each other. I have a few fans who are really, anything I put out, they are going to retweet, they are going to like, they are going to share, they're going to do all that stuff. And I love those people. They're fantastic. But when it comes to conversations like that, I kind of take the approach, and I'm a big believer in this. And even when I was working in radio, I was managing the news talk stations in Saskatoon and Regina. And one of the things I had talked to our hosts about back then, when we were first starting to embrace social media, is you will win more people with honey. You will, if you give them a reply, if you are willing to actually even follow them back, you will win them over every time versus ignoring them or writing them off. Now, that said, some people are jerks and they deserve to be written off or deserve to be told something if they're persistent in being jerks. But for the most part, everybody deserves the benefit of the doubt. And so in that case, I think the way that you approach it is, you got something wrong. It's, oh, tell me more. Or, gee, I'm sorry about that. Tell me more and help me understand. And if it's praise, you thank them for being part of it. Thank you so much for spending time with whatever I've done, because, there are millions of choices on the internet. I'm sure that you chose me today. That you have to take that approach. That's how you build those fans for a long period of time.
Well, John, as we've just hit 10 p.m. in Hong Kong, thank you very much for joining us here in Canada and wherever people are in the world watching this live, watching it again, or via the Cafe Soco podcast. Don't forget, search Cafe Soco on social media and you will find everything related to this and future productions. John, thank you so much. Next week, I'm going to be speaking to Chris Flack, who is a visual communication specialist. He's a fantastic designer. He was behind a amazing campaign called Comic Sans for Cancer, and it was a campaign where lots of artists gathered together and joined their hatred for Comic Sans, the font, and did something good with it. The first time anyone's done anything good with Comic Sans, in fairness. I can see that Donna's on this blab at the moment, and Donna is a very good designer. I was talking to her the other day. But yes, next week, Chris Flack will be joining me from New Zealand. This is crazy. This week it's Hong Kong, next week New Zealand, and then the following week going to be speaking to someone from Toronto. So everyone, thank you for taking part in today's blab. It's going to be available to watch again very shortly, also available on YouTube and all the usual suspects. John Himpe, thank you very much for being my guest.
Thank you, Dan.